Now just let me know when you've got that and then I can start. Okay. So we're all set. So it is 10:01. We'll call the meeting to order. Since this is our first meeting and we have some attendees with us, if we can just do an introduction of our membership, and then we'll give a little background on the establishment of this subcommittee. So I am Janet Reeves. I am the Parks and Marina Administrator for the City of Lewis.
I am Warren Goldie, Parks Commissioner for Mary Vessels Park and 1812 Park, and a board member of Lewis and Bloom.
Barry Duncan, I'm on the Recreation Parks Commission. I'm also on the Public Art Committee for the town.
Candace Vasella, I'm Parks and Recreation Commissioner for Stango Park, and my teammate Christine Beshy has the Stango Park extended, the library property, and the trailhead adjacent to the library.
Okay, thank you. So to give a little background for those that are listening, on the committee, back at our December 21st Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, there was a discussion of possible action on allowing Lewis and Bloom to permit business sponsorship at the gardens at the Rollins Community Center and the Lewis Public Library. At that time, we discussed that the issue had come before the Parks and Rec Commission on at least 2 previous occasions. Warren, you had mentioned at the December 21st meeting that in the past, those requests had been declined by mayor and city council because of the concern that there would be favoritism over one business over another. There was also concern about the number and types of signage in the parks and the parks becoming congested with sign sponsorship and whatnot. So back in 2018, I believe, there was a motion after one of these similar discussions to form a committee to review the proposals, review the requests, and develop a program that had consistent guidelines. So that brings us to where we are today. So our goal, our task is to develop a program that could be, again, presented to mayor and city council. So I think, you know, the first item that we had on the agenda is discussion of the need for and merits of a sponsorship program for the city parks in Lewis, and then how do we implement that? So Warren, you had mentioned that some of the gardens that are not on city property do have sponsorship, and those signs remain all year. So what is the view for Lewis and Bloom? What are they, if you can just go over what their needs are and their requests are?
Well, simply in other, where there are other city properties where we do planting, that we would be reimbursed for our planting. That would mainly be the Stango Park extended, all the Stango Park areas. I really feel that the sponsorship, if there are sponsorships, the city, it should be a city sponsorship of the park. That most cities, many cities, and I was friendly with the park director of Denver, Colorado, former park director. and they had all their parks sponsored. And it's a way that they can, no city has enough money for their parks in their regular budget. This supplements the budget, and this way they're able to have all kinds of activities and concerts and plantings and structures in the park that they would never be able to afford without raising taxes, which are a burden on the whole population of the city. So I think if you had a sponsorship of the parks, the whole town would benefit, the park would benefit, you would be able to have many more events, and it would ease the burden on the city finances. And Lewis and Bloom would all Lewis and Bloom would want for it is to get reimbursed for the plantings that they would put into the park or other services perhaps.
So you were talking, you had mentioned benefits of funding for events and such in the parks. So it's not just for Lewis and Bloom planting in the parks.
No. It would be, if for example, there's not enough money to go around for tree planting in a park this would enable the trees to be planted in a particular park, say George Smith Park, for example. Or, I mean, it could pertain to anything that in the park to improve the park.
Okay.
I mean, it's not a new concept. I mean, there's probably about 10 years ago, I mean, Recreation and Parks Department started accepting donations because they couldn't afford to do things and budgets were cut. So I think, to me, it's just a matter of creating a program and controlling, how big the signage is, when the sign goes up, and so on and so forth, and making sure that people are donating a substantial amount of money before they get some kind of a sign. If somebody gives $100, well, that's great. They might mention them somewhere, but to me, $100 is not, doesn't constitute a sign. When I did concerts in the park when I was the Recreation Parks Director, I remember, going to my bank for funds, and I was going to ask them. I needed like, I don't know, $3,000 to $5,000 or whatever, and I asked my bank for like 500, and my bank says, "Well, how much would it cost to sponsor the whole thing?" Whoa. So I mean, but what I actually did was then I created a sponsorship program. So like if you gave $2,000, you would get you would be mentioned in the news article. You would be on the flyers that send out as the premier sponsor or the gold sponsor, whatever. And then if you gave $500, you'd be something else, and maybe you wouldn't get your name in the paper, but you'd get your name on the flyer, or just things like that. The premier sponsor gets a sign, the other sponsors just gets mentioned or listed in the program or whatever. So I mean,
Another alternative is to form friend societies for the parks that don't have them. I mean, right now, Canal Front Park and George H.P. Smith Park have friend societies, and they contribute to the benefit of the park. I mean, it would be great to have those for the other city parks. I mean, that's another way that, and that's a way that people can contribute $100 at a time. But how do we form an organization to do that. I mean, where does the impetus come from?
And I think that it's important too, if, there's formation of additional organizations of friends groups, that there's similar kind of guidelines, right, on what's done in the parks and working with the park commissioners.
The way I think about our mission here is to put an umbrella policy structure over how donations are treated across the board for the entire city, not just in the parks, but to give some consistency to how we acknowledge the generosity of organizations or people, both, to give to the city parks and lands, not just the parks, but other parcels of land that the city, within the city limits. So that's how I think about this. I think about it more as a policy rather than trying to create a bunch of other friends groups necessarily, which creates more bureaucracy and more complexity to it than a policy. So the document that I shared with you, Janet, was a result of noodling around on the internet with other municipalities to see what other cities and towns have done to try to create that policy umbrella and enable us to provide consistency to people who want to make a donation and have it acknowledged.
Yep, that was a great starting point, Candace. I appreciate that. And I did send that to Warren and Barry. And so perhaps a starting point is the various ways that we could recognize sponsors, and then look at levels based on those various means of possible sponsorship. Does that make sense? Or starting with the level of donation and then matching that with a type of sponsorship. And I think it's important to consider all types of sponsorships and levels, and not just signage, because I think then there's just a lot of signs around the city, and we have that already for various other signage. So I don't know which should start first, the types of recognition or the levels of contribution. Any thoughts on that?
When you talked to the director or somebody at the Delaware Center for Horticulture, did you not?
I did, and actually that was primarily what we talked about. Is I mean, they do large projects, large public landscapes in the medians and the right of ways, and they work with local businesses to pay and maintain that, and they do it through a contract agreement. It's generally a 3-year contract agreement, and they provide signage during that time period. She also talked about, funding for complete redos of public areas. And of course, that is a very large project requiring larger sponsorship donations. They have landscaping programs where, again, larger donations. And those larger projects generally do receive signage at the location. But she did discuss other means of recognition on their website, through a magazine that they have called Cultivate, recognizing people that sponsors that way. She talked about developing a brochure and literature to document the project from start to finish and the sponsors that, worked on it, the volunteer organizations that worked on the project, and giving recognition that way. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I think Candace's document also recognized that kind of off-site recognition. So there seems to be a lot of opportunity. It's just how do we organize it based on project, based on level of contribution.
What's the maximum like donation that you're looking at, Warren?
I don't have a maximum donation. I mean,
Well, I mean, what's generally the most amount of money somebody's donated, or that you would?
well, the largest sponsorship we have for on a non-city property at this point is $2,000
Okay.
a year.
Which is really not a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of
Right.
money, but it's not, in the big scheme of things, it's not,
No.
And that's for one of the gardens that is on private.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that might be a threshold. I mean, you could, start with something like that. I mean, I think the biggest issue that a lot of people have is the signs and people seeing that as a means of advertisement for
Yes.
organizations. And in my mind, you just control that. You state that it's not an advertisement. It's merely an acknowledgement of the contribution and support. And then you delineate how big the sign's going to be. It's going to be a plaque that's, 2 feet by 2 feet or 2 by 3 or whatever. And that the, Recreation and Parks reserves the right to display that sign as long as they want. And, maybe for a particular season, you say, hey, we expect the sign to be up from, May 1st to October 1st or whatever, so that at least, a donor knows, hey, I'll have exposure, or at least acknowledgement for a certain period of time.
I think that's a good starting point. I also think that the city should create the signage versus having them provide a sign to us, because then the control over how it's worded, to your point, that this is an acknowledgement, it's not supposed to be an advertisement, so that they don't take a sign, for example, of that they would normally use for advertising and say, well, here's our sign. It
Right.
meets your specifications of these dimensions, and we want it placed here in this garden spot, and this is the location we would like, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's where the policy question of how we manage this comes to the table.
I think it really, we have already the little bronze signs for trees and benches. I think we have to keep the same type of
Yeah, that's
thing for that. I mean,
Consistency is good, yeah.
yeah. I think those type of signs are much more tasteful
Mhm.
in the parks.
Yeah.
And it's
As opposed to something blowing in the breeze.
right.
we don't want any billboards.
I mean, those cost some money, so you would have to get a 3-year commitment at least, I would think.
Well,
From
there you go. There's another thing too.
And
So
then
we-
the other kinds of acknowledgements aren't necessarily physical things. To
Right.
Janet's point, then they get a letter of acknowledgement that they can use and say the city thanked us, and they put it on their website. See, we did something nice for the city. It's on our website. They thanked us. Or a certificate of appreciation the mayor can issue, or
I mean, just
however.
mentioning it in the press too, say, hey, we'll mention this in articles that go out about the event, not guaranteeing how many times it's going to be in, but I mean, that's advertisement really, when you talk about, hey, here are the people that help Lewis and Bloom, beautify the town.
We had a comment, Marty Thompson's on, and she wants to comment. I think Janelle just brought her up. Marty, are you on?
Yeah, I just unmuted. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
I apologize for getting on late. I didn't keep track of when the subcommittee was meeting, but I would like to offer just a couple comments, and of course, eventually this will come back to Parks and Rec for a vote, I assume. But first, one of my big questions is what will the money be used for? What is the need? I think before we put a single corporate sign anywhere, in my opinion, we need to know why we need it. For instance, is there a desire for a big project that the city is not willing to fund by itself? In which case, and that comes up from time to time, the playground and some other things that, we really did welcome corporate sponsorship in that case. My next comment is this for your just reference, but I know time after time we have resisted having any kind of sign bigger than those little plaques, those little plaques we use for tree commemoration
Mhm.
or for bench commemoration. They're very small, they're very unobtrusive, they're very tasteful. There's no logos. And they're basically at ground level or on the back of the bench. When you talk about signs 2 by 3 feet, oh my goodness. I cannot imagine ever agreeing to anything like that.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't. I mean,
But I
wasn't-
think I think what I would like to see out of this subcommittee is a proposal for what kind of signs we would allow. I thought that's why we had a subcommittee, to say, yeah, we'll only allow a sign at ground level that's brass and it's X inches by X inches or something like that. I mean, we need some clarity on this to present it to Marion City Council, because if it's wide open so that anybody can propose a 2 by 4 sign, I don't think that does what we need it to do. Yeah, we need to have more clarity on what the proposal is that we would allow. We would allow corporate sign if it's, such and such a size and it's mounted such and such a way. And then let Marion
But
City
it needs
Council
to be
say whether
tied to
they
the amount of
agree.
money
Pardon?
that I think it needs to be tied to how much they're contributing.
Well, okay. So come up with something, but again, come up with. I think what we need is a rationale for allowing any signs at all into the parks, and we could come up with a
Well, that's easy to come
proposed
up with.
sponsorship level. We have it for trees, for commemorative trees. We have a dollar amount right in the policy, and same for benches. So, but I mean. Do we
What's
really
that?
need?
What are your dollar amounts for benches and trees?
It's based on. I'd have to look it up. Actually, I have it in the. But it's based on, in general, what it costs to buy a tree and plant it and take care of it for a couple of years, and then the bench policy is similar. It's based on what it costs to buy one of those expensive good benches.
Yeah, it's essentially
I would
the
have to look it up.
cost of the bench or the tree plus the cost of the plaque, and then a 10% for maintenance of the tree and or the bench.
But I remind everybody, we got lots of really good sponsorship for the playground, and there are no plaques there.
Mhm.
So that's my next question. Do we really need to have plaques to get more money? Is
Yeah.
that really needed?
Yes.
I don't understand the need for that. You need to make a case for that, in my opinion. You need to make a case for that. Give us examples.
It stands to reason you're going to get more money if you acknowledge people.
Yeah, but do we need more money? Tell me what you need
Part
money
of it we
for, and
do.
I'll tell. No, seriously, I'm serious about this.
I need
Tell
money.
me,
to put
tell
some
me
up
what you
playground.
need more money for, and then we need to go to city council and see if they'll give us that money. If they won't give us that money and they're okay with selling plaques in order to get the money from elsewhere, that's great. But before we start putting plaques everywhere with corporate names on it, let's try to avoid that. I really hate the idea of having a lot of corporate plaques everywhere. I really, really hate it. And I think a lot of people do.
Well, then I think you're going to have less. You're just going to have less.
Well, come up with examples, Barry. You you funded the new playground with a lot of corporate donations.
Yeah, and I certainly would have done a little plaque to acknowledge. I mean, that I got contributions of like $2,000 and $3,000, and
Yes, yes.
and they, but
Yeah, and you got the job done without filling it full of plaques. I think it's great what you
well,
did.
I think a tiny little plaque near the playground, I think would be fine to acknowledge, County Bank, that they gave the major portion of the money to,
Okay, well,
fund the rest
but
of
you
it.
didn't need it in order to get that playground done. You didn't need it.
I didn't need the money.
You didn't need the plaque. In that case,
No.
you did not need the plaque in order to get
No,
that
but
money.
maybe I would have gotten more too.
And in fact, Lewis and Bloom last year did a fundraising campaign where they got a lot more money than they set out for, and they didn't have to put up a plaque for anybody. So is it really needed? That's my first question. Is it really needed?
Well-
I know Lou in Swanadale Park has gotten several lovely, hosta bed and a bunch of other things done by various organizations and volunteers. They didn't need to put up any plaques in order to get that done. So that's my first question. And I think we ought to have standards for when we're going to offer plaques, because if we don't need them, we shouldn't get them. That's just my opinion.
Well, from the standpoint of Lewis and Bloom, if we got reimbursement for our plantings in Stango Park extended, we would be happy. I mean, I know, however, I've been at council meetings where Parks and Recreation budgets have come up, and there's some of the council has said they think that's Parks and Rec budget's very high. So
Well, and mayor and city council might welcome the opportunity to get more money this way. They might, but that's why the recommendation, in my opinion, should include that kind of factor, and then the size of the plaque and where it would be put. And yeah,
I think also Lewis and Bloom is kind of unique in terms of donation, because, if we're talking about donating money for plant materials, we're also getting along with that all the volunteer hours that are used to plant them. So it's really kind of an odd, donation versus I'm donating money for a bench, and that's pretty much about it, except for 10% maintenance. But with the Lewis and Bloom, they've got, $1,000 worth of plantings that they're doing, but they probably have, a couple thousand hours of hours that, so
yes,
that's,
it's about lot. We are
harder.
blessed with lots and lots of volunteer hours in this town, a lot of them, and we actually use that information when we submit for grants and things like that. A lot of the grantors want to know what your level of volunteer involvement is, and it's costed out. I think is for each volunteer hour is what, $23 and change or something in value. That's or is it $28? I've lost track. But anyway, yeah. For instance, when I submit to Tree City, that's how it's costed out. It's valued at that. So yeah, that helps in many, many ways. Yes. So, okay. I'm sorry. I have to drop off and take care of some other stuff, but I thought I'd put in my 2 cents, and I look forward to hearing what you come up with.
Thank you, Marty. I think that
Thanks,
was
Marty.
very
I
helpful.
appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Marty.
Take care.
Okay, so Marty's points were helpful. I think, pointing out that we have done things without sponsorship, and again, it goes back to the merits and the need of the sponsorship. So do we want to go back to the policy structure? And part of that policy structure might include the need for the program, right? So I think we have to go back and identify the need for a sponsorship program. And that's probably the starting point there is, what is the identified need for the program, and framing that, and identifying how much we think that we would need from a sponsorship program for certain projects, ongoing projects. And I think, we also have to be cognizant of private organizations sponsoring on public lands, the message that puts forward when it's being managed by the city, and we have landscape contracts, we have other contractors that we work with for certain things. So where is the balance of that in our parks and city property?
I think about this in a linear fashion. So one thing comes before the others. So a program comes later, but the policy comes first to establish what the boundaries are with regard to why it's needed, what happens if it is needed, who does what, all of the parameters that you would normally plug into a policy. That's how I think about what we're here to do.
Who, what, why, where, when?
All of those things. Answer all the questions, basically.
Yep.
And then from there, the program gets established if a need is identified, or the program gets triggered, I should say, if a need is then identified. Does that comport with your thoughts, Warren? I mean, when you think about Lewis and Bloom, if the need is there, then it falls under the policy umbrella?
Yes, I think so. I mean, for example, I'm commissioner of the 1812 Park. So and this is outside Lewis and Bloom. I see something in 1812 Park that I think would make a big difference there. I'm not going to mention it offhand, but I think it's a $20,000 to $25,000 project.
Okay.
It's not necessary. It's aesthetic. Certainly, because of aesthetics, the city isn't going to, they're not going to be able to justify that in their budget. How do you raise the money for that if to do that? If you had a friends society, you could do that. I don't know otherwise. If you had sponsorship, you probably would be able to do, do this over a period of time. I mean, it enables you to make improvements beyond what is necessary. It raises the level of the beauty and use of the parks if you have more money to work with.
Well, I mean, it stands to reason, if you take donations, you're going to get a lot more. I don't think that's going to encourage the city to fund less. I mean,
No, it's no.
just augments it. It just
Yes.
allows you to do more and create more. I mean, just like the tree program, we wouldn't have as many trees if we didn't have sponsors for the trees, I'm sure. I don't know how many trees have been sponsored in the city. I mean, the city would pay for some trees where needed, but I mean,
Well, if we had more sponsorship, I mean, I think our tree program is probably underfunded because we're playing catch up from some years where we didn't have enough done. If we didn't have to spend so much money on other things and had donations for the parks, we might be able to have more money for trees, for tree maintenance. I mean, I just think that the overall use and maintenance of the parks would be improved if we could have, a little more funding in that area.
But I struggle with that, with sponsorship for maintenance of the park. Because again, we have landscape contracts that do the maintenance of the park. So I think we need to frame it differently and be cautious and mindful of what we have city contracts for the work that's done in the parks. Because if we start sponsorships for that, I'm not sure that that's a project and activity that warrants sponsorship. Something else like, a project, an improvement would be more appropriate, something that enhances the park.
When I think of what we might be talking about with regard to donations and acknowledgement of those, I think of capital improvements versus maintenance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that Marcia and I talked about too, she's from the Delaware Center for Horticulture. She had suggested that there are also grants. Warren, you talked about enhancements. I did some research on grants, and for example, Home Depot has a grant program for gardening. And so the grant funds can be utilized for any tools, any equipment, any material for a project. And that might be something else to look at. I don't know that, it wouldn't fund a capital improvement project, but there are other opportunities out there besides sponsorship programs. That grant is actually opening up on February 1st, which is next week. So that might be something to consider and think about. I think it was $2,000 or $2,500, which,
but
yeah.
the children's garden has utilized the Home Depot grant in the past.
Has some grants? Okay. So for maybe, maybe those smaller projects, that might be a more feasible avenue for funding, and looking at sponsorship for some of the larger projects for, as Candace said, capital improvement within the parks. Because again, we have the commemorative tree program, the commemorative bench program. We have the opportunity for grant funding. So I think when we look at the who, what, where, when, why, how, that would be the what. What is it that we actually want to have sponsorship for? So when you look at the other opportunities, I think that the opportunities for funding, it kind of can narrow it down for us.
Well, what Lewis and Bloom really wanted sponsorship for was for the plantings at the library and the Rollins Center.
What kind of money are we looking for, Warren, with those two things combined?
I'd say we're looking at somewhere for the $1,500 when plus Stango Park. So the whole
So the whole complex is about 1,500.
And with Stango, I would say it's $2,500.
So are you saying Stango Park plus
Rollins Center and the
the
library.
whole thing? And the library, about 2,500 for the whole thing? Okay.
And that would fund the plant materials, basically, is what you're.
Yes, and the labor is provided free.
Right.
By the volunteers, sure.
Yeah.
So that might be something that we could look at for that grant opportunity. And just actually, I'm looking at that site right now, and it does award for up to $5,000. So that might be an opportunity.
The plant material that you use for those areas, is that material that must come from a greenhouse somewhere, or is it something that's commonly available? What's your sense of the availability of the plant material, Warren?
Well, we have contract growers for most of our plant material.
Okay.
Plus, that would include the tulip bulbs that we plant in the fall, which we buy in.
Sure. Okay.
The city is now provides the mulching for that area. That's not a problem there.
And where additional mulch is needed, Christine and I have identified in our budgets a portion of that for additional mulching as needed later on. So I think we have that covered as well.
Okay. So I think we have our start here, and narrowing it down. I think we really need to narrow down the types of things that the sponsorship program would be developed for, the what. Because I think smaller things like you know, Warren, what you're talking about with the plantings at the park at Stango and the library could be addressed through grant funding. And perhaps we want to look at other types of projects for sponsorship.
Okay.
Are there any thoughts on what types? Or do we want to talk about the why? I'm trying to circle back to the mission and establishing boundaries for the policy. So we can start on any one of those areas.
So I guess if a capital project were proposed by a commissioner, let me just throw this out, and it exceeded the ability of the city to accommodate that in the budget process at a certain dollar threshold.
Mhm.
Let's throw out a number, $5,000. I don't know. It could be any number, but let's say there's a threshold. And the city budget process can't accommodate that capital project in that fiscal year,
Mhm.
then perhaps that capital project would be a candidate under this umbrella policy for then seeking donations to accomplish that project. Does that come to the question of the why? Because it can't be accommodated in the normal budget process.
Right. Any thoughts on that?
That sounds reasonable.
And then the policy would kick in for how that project could be advertised as being in need of funds. And then the rest of the policy would address whether there was any recognition, or if there was recognition, what type of recognition would be provided to the people who donated money, you know, a thank you letter, a certificate, publicity, et cetera, et cetera. And you'd kind of wend your way down that list of possible types of acknowledgement based upon the amount of money that was provided to that specific project. It'd be a trigger system, basically. If this happens, then this can happen.
From a historical perspective, again, circling back to the why, have there been capital improvement projects that in the past that have not been able to be fully funded by the city?
Well, the playground's probably a good example, right, Barry?
Yeah. Yes.
That's probably the most recent
Okay.
big project that enjoyed support from outside the city coffers with donations.
And that was George H.P. Smith Playground. Okay. That's helpful. Because I think that it demonstrates that there is potentially a need, because we've had a situation in the not too distant past where we needed sponsorship. So that's good information to have as we try to bring the policy together.
With that situation, what happened was there was matching funds from the state, and Lewis added to the match, but the project that we wanted was a little bit more money. So
Okay.
that's why we needed the additional funds.
Okay.
Um,
That's good historical perspective in identifying the need for the program. So without that sponsorship program, we would not have been able to carry through the project as
Correct.
planned. Okay,
Correct.
good.
And I think we were short, I'd have to look it up, like $4,000 or $5,000.
Okay.
So we got 2 or 3 sponsors and 1 major bank.
How, and Barry, I know you said that there were no signs, and there are no signs in the playground area in the park. How were those sponsors recognized at that time?
Well, they were there at the ribbon cutting ceremony with the mayor, so they got, obviously that got press from that. So, I mean, that's kind of how. And I just, made contact with some of my personal contacts and was able to, get them to donate.
Okay,
I mean, and it was a local bank, so it was easier, but
right.
anytime you're raising funds from bigger banks
Okay.
and stuff like that, it's always harder, but.
So that's, another good example of recognition, being at the ribbon cutting. It's always a photo op. There's something on the news when there's a ribbon cutting. So I think as we move through this, we can develop those lists of how to recognize sponsors, and I think that's a good one. Other thoughts as we move through our, so we have our, I think our why is for, obviously, Candace, you articulated it very well, for those capital projects that exceed the cost allowed by the city budget process. The balance could be authorized through a sponsorship program. I think that kind of covers the what as well. It's a capital project, so that's the why and the what. We have a discussion on the who.
A discussion on the what?
The who of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Trying to break it down. Just preliminary ideas, and then we'll kind of pull it all together.
I don't quite understand the who.
Well, I think that would be perhaps who the sponsors are. Candace, would that be how you envision that?
Well, the policy would have the who from the standpoint of park commissioners being accountable and responsible for the parks. If it's not a park, then it's a bigger city question. But the umbrella policy is probably in need of being a city policy, so that it covers not just the parks, but all the city lands within the city limits. So the way I think about this, our proposed policy would go before mayor and city council as something they would adopt for the city, with us being players, essential players from the parks perspective.
Okay.
And then the consistency of the application of the policy would be something that we would encourage to be applied citywide and not just for the parks, so that it would, it would be applied universally.
Okay.
So then the who has, you've got 2 different groups of who's. You've got
Right.
the city officials, and then you've got donors.
Any comments on that? Thoughts? No? Okay. Okay.
So I guess with the how, if we were to think about that question in your list of questions that we're trying to answer, where it specifically is a park question, then the Parks and Recreation Commissioners would be engaged in figuring out whether that capital improvement rose to the level of needing funding outside the city. In the case of the city, I'm not quite sure who the focal point would be for that, but city manager and you, Janet, combined perhaps with that in terms of the who people would approach for approval of capital improvements in parts of the city outside the parks. I guess that's where I'm going.
Well, yeah, I think for the capital improvements from the park side, certainly the commissioners and myself, and if we as a body, right, start to think about the individual parks and capital improvements early in the year for the next budget cycle, right? We can start to get the estimates, we can start, some conceptual planning and whatnot, and then we would go build that into our budget for, the budget hearings. And, the same thing for the city side of it. They have their hearings on capital improvements. And I think we would, work it the same way. If, if we do have a program, it would be another funding stream. So, but from the park side, something that I would like to start to do moving forward is have the discussion of capital improvements earlier on in the year for the next budget cycle, because then it would give us the opportunity to get a handle on, actual cost for the projects well in advance. So. Any other thoughts on that item? So we started to talk throughout about various types of sponsorship. Is it a time to talk about that and the dollar amount, or just to put some ideas on paper?
I mean, I think you could very simply just say, contributions in the amount of $2,000 or more would be eligible for some kind of signage. And the signage is this size. We're not, I mean, you could just start by doing that. I mean, you can make it whatever amount you want. But,
So perhaps it might not be a sign per se though, but it could be something physical. Is that within what you're thinking, Barry? I mean, so when we talk about the trees, for example, we're talking about those little embedded in the ground right in front of the tree. There's a very tasteful little brass flag.
Sign, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
right. So a signage isn't necessarily flapping in the wind sign.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on you know, what you're using the money for. You know, I mean, a playground or a planting is something that it's pretty visible and pretty, you know, but there may be other things that aren't quite as, you know, you may be able to get more recognition from a ribbon cutting event, or I don't know.
So maybe instead of signage, we use the word recognition? Or does it have to
I
be
would say
physical?
formal recognition,
Okay,
formal recognition. And then we could, you know,
Determine,
our own guidelines. So that, again, you're not, you know, somebody donates $200 or $300, you know, we appreciate that and we'll list you as a donor, but, you know, if you really want, you know, more recognition, you gotta really.
what is the cost of the signs we're using for the trees now? Do you know?
What was the question?
The cost of the signs, the little bronze plaque that we're using for the trees?
I think they're between maybe 250 to 350. I was on the website the other day, and I think they're 250 to 350 in that ballpark.
they're not inexpensive. They're pretty costly when you
Yeah,
look at that.
Yeah.
so you'll have to get a pretty sizable lasting donation in order to justify that.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to kind of bring us back, because we seem to have, we've expanded our discussion from not only the parks to other city-owned land, where there might be things done, either plantings or whatnot. And again, I just want to be cautious again about the sponsorship. I mean, I think, and the message of organizations, private organizations sponsoring on the public lands, and I think that's where, you know, we're talking about, you know, the commemorative bricks as signage. I know I've seen some of the signs, Warren, that are on non-city owned land. But I think that if we're expanding that way, we need to have some specification, you know, for the commemorative tree and bench. There's no like signage. There's no business emblem or business design on those bricks. And I think that, you know, that's a point for another discussion. And we talked earlier about being consistent across what's already done in the parks, at least for sponsorship, whether it's the trees or the benches or whatnot. So I think that that's something that, you know, we'd have to look at as well when we're talking about the types of recognition. So where do we go? Where should we go from here?
So I have a question for my colleagues. Are we in agreement that we need a policy before we develop a program? Is that Are you comfortable with that idea?
Well, if I understand it correctly, we're supposed to develop a policy that Lewis and Bloom could operate under. Isn't that what our charge is? I don't think we were just put together to develop a program for Lewis and Bloom.
No,
I think that's how I think about it. But the
Mhm.
word policy was not part of the discussion in the prior meeting. And I've thrown that out to you for your consideration because that's how I think about it. But I wanted to be sure we were kind of on the same page
Mhm.
as regards to that.
So we just have to decide what the parameters of that policy is.
Mhm.
Dollar amounts, I mean, you can change that every year if you want, as things become more costly or whatever, or,
So the motion at the December 21st meeting was to develop a proposal for how Lewis and Bloom might be supported by sponsors. So that has kind of expanded during the past hour of our discussion here this morning. So perhaps we might circle back to that item and work on that with what are your thoughts, Candace?
Well, I was thinking it's hard to address that specific question until there are some guidelines for how to address that question.
Okay,
It's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
right.
no, you're right.
So, right, okay,
So I'm not trying to put off addressing the Lewis and Bloom question, but in order to do that, I think our first job is to flesh out a policy
a policy.
under which we would then assist Lewis and Bloom down the road.
So
That-
we really kind of already have a sort of an unwritten policy with the trees and the benches, do we not? People give so much money for a tree, they get a plaque. The plaque is just
Yeah.
has been a
I
certain.
can, yeah, I can send that to you all if you want
Oh,
to take
would
a
you?
look.
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point to look
Okay.
at
yeah,
what the city has sanctioned as the method by which acknowledgement is proffered to a donor. And then from the way I've worked on things like this in the past, it's always good to work with a draft. So maybe, pulling together some thoughts on a straw policy to massage and amend for our next meeting would be.
Okay,
I think the other thing that we should look at is the sponsors for the concerts. Because that's certainly a lot of money. And I think we get matching money from state arts or something like that. But I mean, there are, and they get recognition, I think in the paper or at the event itself.
At every concert, they're acknowledged. Yeah.
they are.
Right. So,
And they're in the program as well. They're acknowledged in the concert series brochure. So there's two.
and those are things that the donors want to know too. If we can delineate that ahead of time too, I think it will garner more support. If somebody knows, hey, my name's going to be mentioned 5 times at 5 parks with at least 250 people there, or whatever.
Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
But that's the program.
That's
Right.
What I just said was a program for.
Right. So
For the
you're going back to
concert.
the guidelines still need to be
Fit into that program
Written
should
down.
fit into whatever
Mhm.
whatever policy we develop.
So I'd like to suggest, if I may, perhaps for our next meeting, we, in advance of that, we have a draft policy with ideas collected from what the city already does
Mhm.
in a document that we could review and have a conversation about during our next meeting. I don't think we'd be done during that meeting, but it would be a starting point for us to look at past precedent, actual practice of the city, and then think about it in terms of our remit, which is, you know, parks and matters relating to beautification of the city.
Okay. So I will, who wants to take on the task of the draft? Candace, thank you.
I think you're the best anyway.
Oh, no, I'll give it a whirl, and then you all can make it better.
No, I think that's great.
Okay. So I will send out the tree and bench, commemorative tree and bench program to each of you today, and then we can work off of that. Anybody that has, after looking at that, comments, thoughts, please send them to Candace as the
And if you could get
collector of ideas and information to put into the policy.
if you could get the information on the concerts, I think probably Allison would know.
Well, yeah, I have that.
Okay.
I can send a copy of a previous concert brochure that just has wording on,
Does it have
and
the
then,
amount that the donors,
pardon?
does it have the amount that everybody donated?
Well, there's only one sponsor.
Okay.
So the Delaware Division of the Arts is a grant program. There's
Right.
a project support program, but that's a grant. And then WSFS Bank is a
Right.
sponsor.
He's the sponsor.
And I
Total.
think in the past, it's been pretty consistent every year. It's $2,500
Okay.
to, you know, offset the costs of the concerts, the concert fees. So, but I can certainly send a copy of that around,
No,
just for wording. Yeah.
Sounds good. And then if I have any questions, Janet, I'll circle back with you. If,
Okay.
as I put something together, questions arise, I'll just reach out to you.
Great. Okay.
So then our next meeting?
You want to schedule the next meeting?
sure.
And Warren, if you want me to send you the Home Depot grant, if you want to take a look at that and see if that's something that might fit in the meantime, for Lewis and Bloom,
Please do.
we can work on that. I think that's a good opportunity. So
Yeah.
I'll send that to you. I'm all the way up to June. I was working on the concerts. So let me get back. Let me go back in my calendar. So today's the 29th. Are there particular days that work? Do we want to stay with a consistent day?
I'm not in favor of Fridays. Fridays seem busy for me, but
You're what?
I said I'm not in favor of Fridays, but I just gotta like going usually on Fridays.
Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at the calendar.
Wednesday or Thursday, fine.
You'll need to avoid what city meetings normally.
Right, that's all,
take
that's the
place on
challenge.
Calendar, that will drive you, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. Are Wednesdays good for?
Sure.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 weeks out from today would be February 24th. Or we could do March 3rd.
Either one works for me.
I'm good with either one.
How
Would-
about March 3rd? Give us all a little extra time.
Okay,
Does 10 o'clock work?
sure.
Okay.
We made some progress.
Mhm.
I think so. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Okay,
Everybody stay warm.
Yeah.
It's gonna be cold the next couple days.
yes,
Mhm.
it is.
Those Icelandic woolens are gonna come in handy.
Yeah, but I'm headed south. I'm not gonna
Oh.
need them anymore.
Oh,
Where are you
that's
going,
right.
Barry?
When do you leave?
I'm going to West Palm. Well, I was gonna leave Sunday, but they're calling for rain and snow, so I'm leaving
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Safe
All right.
travels.
Thank you.
Safe. Have fun.
All righty.
Mar-a-Lago?
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to West Palm Beach. I hope I don't see him.
All right.
See ya.
Safe
Take care,
travel.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.